Perfect. That leads us to our next question, which is what's a rough timeline for the various components of completing a closure in one semester?
Sure. Okay. So if you're doing a thesis and you want to do it in one semester, you need to already, at the beginning of the semester, know exactly what your topic is. So the prior semester, when you were registering for 590, you should have had a proposal created that actually outlined, here's my question, here's my data, here's how I'm going to analyze it. The beginning of the semester for a thesis, you should already be starting to write a draft. Like you should be, I'm starting to, basically a draft can be broken down into different parts. But once with that initial kind of proposal, you can build from that and then create a literature review, which I mean, that doesn't take any outside data collection. You just go and you find the literature on the databases in the library. And so you would be building the components of your thesis during the semester. The reason this is really hard to do in one semester is because your first draft is not done. It's not. Your first draft is like, it's nice, it's a draft. None of our first drafts, as people who publish research in journals, they're not done. They go through hundreds of iterations. So your first draft, and really you should be sending chunks of your thesis to your chair. Like, here's my lit review. How does this look? Am I missing anything? You know, here's my first data analysis. It didn't work out. There's no correlations. Oh no, it's not statistically significant. What do I do? You send that. So you should be sending them chunks throughout the semester, but you should really have a draft. Let's say if you're doing in the spring, you should have a draft by the beginning of March. I mean, really, because your draft, like your advisor needs weeks to read it. We have lots of students, lots of classes that we have lots of stuff we're reading. So, you know, we need time to read it and then we send it back to you. And then you need weeks to maybe make edits because you've also got lots going on. You're very busy. And so that's why that timeline is very difficult to do in one semester for a thesis. And that's, I mean, why most people take multiple semesters. Like I would say, if you asked anybody, I mean, I've got a guy now, he's been working on his thesis for like 2 years. So, I mean, that's like very common. It's very common for it to be 2 semesters and maybe like 1 semester in summer. But still, you want to have a draft by like March if you're getting this thing done. And then going back and forth. So then by April, you've got a second draft that you're sending off to mostly your chair. The other people will read it once it gets more polished. So the chair tends to try to do most of the work and then bring in the other committee members when the product is pretty polished, even bringing them in maybe at the very end and just say, here's the final draft. Now, once you have, say, a second or third draft and your chair says this looks good, then you'll defend your thesis. And that's the last thing you do. So at that point, you have a final draft. It's probably gone back and forth several times, like 3 or 4. And then at that point, that's when you share it with the other people on the committee. And they just need it for a couple of weeks so they can read it, or a week or whatever. And then you have an hour-long presentation of it. And that's, or an hour-long meeting where you present your research and then they ask questions. At that point, it's either signed off, you're good to go, you graduate, your thesis is done, or they may ask you to make changes. Like before you actually submit it to the repository in the library, there's like an official process you have to go through to finalize it. They may ask you to change the formatting or the citations, or maybe add a section. They shouldn't be asking you to make huge changes at this point because it's already been vetted throughout the process, but they may. Especially the outside committee people, they might be like, this is weird, you got to change this thing. But you wouldn't be permitted to have the hour-long defense by your chair unless they thought you were ready. So they will not let, you can't be like, I want to schedule this, if you haven't done like a sufficient job of responding to the things that your chair says you need to do. And that's their job. They're helping you. They're kind of coaching you through the process. You know, because that's what they're used to doing. They know how to like field this research to that point. For the exam, the timeline is like this. By the second week of the semester, you should have a list of sources that you will read with your chair. You create them and your chair helps you. Now, some students can just have a topic and they might go and do research and find a list of 80 sources on their own. And then they have this list, and the 80 sources, I don't mean a lot of books, maybe a couple, but because books are harder to obtain, I mean journal articles. So, and you're reading them for months. So it's like you would read that much in a class. So it sounds like a lot, but it's really it's a whole class. It's a master class. So you have this list of sources that you create independently, or your chair gives you suggestions. And usually your chair will add things to it because we are really good at finding things that are related to it, especially in political science. So within the first couple weeks of the semester, this list gets approved. This is your closer exam bibliography. Once this is approved, you're just reading. You're just hanging out 9 o'clock at night after your work is over with, or 5 in the morning, or Saturday, Sunday, whenever you want to read this stuff, you're just reading it. You're going through source by source, and you're taking notes that describe exactly what that article is about in like a paragraph. You don't want notes that are 20 pages long. You want notes that are concise and that say this research analyzed this thing and this is what they found. And that's what you're doing. And you're just writing notes. You're writing notes. And you can send a sample annotated bibliography entry to your chair and they will say, yes, that looks good. Do that for every article that you read. Now you're reading, and say if it's spring, you're going to do that until April, probably the month before the end of the semester. You're going to hand all your stuff in probably at least 3 weeks before the end of the semester. If it's the fall, you want to do it like right after Thanksgiving or right before Thanksgiving. You want to have your list of all your notes, all these notes. You send them to your chair and you say, I'm done. I did all the reading. I have all my notes. And then they need it for a week or two, maybe a week. And then they say, when do you want to, or they say, when do you want to take your exam? And the exam, the written part, needs to happen like 2 weeks before the semester is over with, because if you do it at the very end, there's not time for the oral exam. So you really want to have those turned in. Like a bunch of people turned theirs in this Monday or last Monday. And this was, we're 3 weeks before the end of the semester, like the Monday after Thanksgiving, let's say. Because I realize people watching this won't know what day we're talking about. But so once you give all your notes to your chair, they say, when do you want to take the exam? And how this works, it's a take-home exam. You pick a day of the week. Most people do Friday. You get the exam Friday morning. And then you're just writing based off your notes. It's open note. You shouldn't have to read anything else. You might have to reread something, but you don't need to go do outside research. You've already done the research. And then you're going to turn it in Monday at 5 p.m. That's when it's due. So it's 4 days. Now you could start it on a Monday and turn it in on like a Wednesday at night. So it doesn't have to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, maybe Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Yeah. So that's how that works. But you pick your time. It can be in the middle of the week. It's fine. Now, once you're finished with the written part, that's like a long paper. You have short, or there are multiple questions that you can answer. We usually give you 5 or 6 questions to choose from, and you'll answer like 2 or 3 of them, and you'll write 8 to 10 page papers about each of them. And you should have done this in other classes throughout the program. Like you've probably taken classes where that's one of the assignments. You write 10 pages about something that you've read about already. I think you do that in most of our classes. So it's basically like what you've already been doing, but on the topic that you're an expert on this topic. You've been reading about it for months. And so it's a brain dump, essentially, that's well written. It's written like a literature review. It's not written in the first person. It's very much written about all the stuff that you've read. And it shows you that as a person who's getting a master's degree in political science, that you know how to read the literature and understand it and make connections and analyze it and synthesize it and really kind of speak to the literature like somebody who is qualified to do that. And you are at this point. You're an expert on this topic. And so you have this 4-day window where you're writing these responses, and then you just turn it in. And it's usually like 30 pages long, 10 pages on each topic if you have 3 topics. And then your chair looks at it, and then they schedule the oral exam. And the oral exam happens the last week of school. Or, maybe you can do it early if you want, but usually it's just the last week of school. And the oral exam, you don't fail that usually. That's just like, we don't have you do it unless we think your exam is good. If there's anything in the exam that we thought was kind of lacking, we'll ask you about it. And it's really your chance to show, like, maybe you just didn't have time to mention something because you just forgot about it, or you left something out, or maybe there's something in the exam that we thought was really awesome and we just want to hear more about it. It's just the oral part's just a conversation. It's just that last step to make sure that, you've had an opportunity to share everything that you know. And if there's something that didn't come across in the exam, we can basically cover it in the oral examination component.